Cupronickel is an alloy of copper that contains nickel and strengthening elements such as iron and manganese. Despite its high copper content, cupronickel is silver in color. Cupronickel is highly resistant to corrosion in seawater because its electrode potential is adjusted to be neutral with regard to seawater. For this reason, it is used for piping, heat exchangers and condensers in seawater systems, marine hardware, and sometimes for the propellers, crankshafts and hulls of premium tugboats, fishing boats and other working boats. Another common use of cupronickel is in silver-colored modern circulated coins. A typical mix is 75% copper, 25% nickel, and a trace amount of manganese. In the past, true silver coins were debased with cupronickel name. Aside from the terms cupronickel and copper-nickel, several other terms have been used to describe the material. The trade names alpaca or alpaca, argentin min argent, and the French term cuivre blanc are still registered. Cupronickel is also occasionally referred to as hotel silver, plata alemana, German silver, and Chinese silver. Applications: marine engineering. Cupronickel alloys are used for marine applications due to the resistance to seawater corrosion, good fabricability, and their effectiveness in lowering macrofouling levels. Alloys ranging in composition from 90% Cu 10% Ni to 70% Cu 30% Ni are commonly specified in heat exchanger or condenser tubes in a wide variety of marine applications. Important marine applications for cupronickel include shipbuilding and repair. Cupronickel alloys are used in seawater cooling, bilge and ballast, sanitary, firefighting, inert gas, hydraulic and pneumatic chiller systems, desalination plants. Cupronickel alloys are used in brine heaters, heat rejection and recovery, and in evaporator tubing, offshore oil and gas platforms and processing and FPSO vessels. Cupronickel alloys are used in systems and splash zone sheathlings. Power generation. Cupronickel alloys are used in steam turbine condensers, oil coolers, auxiliary cooling systems and high-pressure preheaters at nuclear and fossil fuel power plants. Seawater system design. Cupronickel alloys are used in tubular heat exchangers and condensers, piping and high-pressure systems. Seawater system components. Cupronickel alloys are used in condenser and heat exchanger tubes, tube sheets, piping, fittings, pumps, and water boxes. Hulls of boats and ships. Coinage. The successful use of cupronickel in coinage is due to its corrosion resistance, electrical conductivity, durability, malleability, low allergy risk, ease of stamping, antimicrobial properties and recyclability. In Europe, Switzerland pioneered the nickel bill and coinage in 1850, with the addition of silver. In 1968, Switzerland adopted the far cheaper 75 to 25 copper to nickel ratio then being used by the Belgians, the United States, and Germany. From 1947 to 2012, all silver coinage in the UK was made from cupronickel, but from 2012 onwards the two smallest cupronickel denominations were replaced with lower-cost nickel-plated steel coins, in part due to silver hoarding in the Civil War. The United States Mint first used cupronickel for circulating coinage in 3-cent pieces starting in 1865, and then for 5-cent pieces starting in 1866. Prior to these dates, both denominations had been made only in silver in the United States. Cupronickel is the cladding on either side of United States half dollars since 1971, and all quarters and dimes made after 1964. Currently, some circulating coins, such as the United States Jefferson nickel, the Swiss franc, and the South Korean 500 and 100 won are made of solid cupronickel. Other usage. Single-core thermocouple cables use a single-conductor pair of thermocouple conductors such as iron constantan, copper constantan and nickel chromium, nickel aluminium. These have the heating element of constantan and nickel chromium alloy within a sheath of copper. Cupronickel, a stainless steel. Cupronickel is used in cryogenic applications. Its combination of good ductility retention and thermal conductivity at very low temperatures is advantageous for low-temperature processing and storage equipment as well as for heat exchanges at cryogenic plants. Beginning around the turn of the 20th century, bullet jackets were commonly made from this material. It was soon replaced with gilding metal to reduce metal fouling in the bore. Currently, cupronickel remains the basic material for silver-plated cutlery. It is commonly used for mechanical and electrical equipment, medical equipment, zippers, jewelry items, and as material for strings for string instruments. Fender musical instruments used knife magnets in their wide-range humbucker pickup for various Telecaster and Starcaster guitars during the 1970s. For high-quality cylinder locks and locking systems, cylinder cores are made from wear-resistant cupronickel. Properties. Important properties of cupronickel alloys include corrosion resistance, inherent resistance to macrofouling, good tensile strength, excellent ductility when annealed, thermal conductivity and expansion characteristics amenable for heat exchanges and condensers, good thermal conductivity and ductility at cryogenic temperatures and beneficial antimicrobial touch surface properties. The alloys are. These values may vary in other standards. Subtle differences in corrosion resistance and strength determine which alloy is selected. Descending the table, the maximum allowable flow rate in piping increases, as does the tensile strength. In seawater, the alloys have excellent corrosion rates which remain low as long as the maximum designed flow velocity is not exceeded. This velocity depends on geometry and pipe diameter. They have high resistance to crevice corrosion, stress corrosion, cracking, and hydrogen embrittlement that can be troublesome to other alloy systems. Copper nickels naturally form a thin protective surface layer over the first several weeks of exposure to seawater, and this provides its ongoing resistance. Additionally, they have a high inherent biofouling resistance to attachment by macrofoulers living in the seawater. To use this property to its full potential, the alloy needs to be free of the effects of, or insulated from, any form of cathodic protection. However, C-uni alloys can show high corrosion rates in polluted or stagnant seawater when sulfides or ammonia are present. It is important, therefore, to avoid exposure to such conditions, particularly during commissioning and refit while the surface films are maturing. Ferrous sulfate dosing to seawater systems can provide improved resistance, as copper and nickel alloy with each other easily and have simple structures. The alloys are ductile and readily fabricated. Strength and hardness for each individual alloy is increased by cold working. They are not hardened by heat treatment. Joining of 90-10 and 70-30 is possible by both welding or brazing. They are both weldable by the majority of techniques, although autogenous or oxyacetylene methods are not recommended. The 70-30 rather than 90-10 weld consumables are normally preferred for both alloys, and no after welding heat treatment is required. They can also be welded directly to steel, providing a 65% nickel-copper weld consumable is used to avoid ion dilution effects. The C71640 alloy tends to be used as seamless tubing and expanded rather than welded into the tube plate. Brazing requires appropriate silver-based brazing alloys. However, great care must be taken to ensure that there are no stresses in the C-uni being silver brazed. since any stress can cause intergranulary penetration of the brazing material and severe stress cracking. Thus, full annealing of any potential mechanical stress is necessary. Applications for C-uni alloys have withstood the test of time, as they are still widely used and range from seawater system piping, condensers and heat exchanges in naval vessels, commercial shipping, multiple-stage flash desalination and power stations. They have also been used as splash zone cladding on offshore structures and protective cladding on boat hulls, as well as for solid hulls themselves. Fabrication. Due to its ductility, cupronickel alloys can be readily fabricated in a wide variety of product forms and fittings. Cupronickel tubing can be readily expanded into tube sheets for the manufacturing of shell and tube heat exchangers. Details of fabrication procedures, including general handling, cutting and machining, forming, heat treatment, preparing for welding, weld preparations, tack welding, welding consumables, welding processes, painting, mechanical properties of welds, and tube and pipe bending are available. Standards ASTM and ISO standards exist for ordering brought and cast forms of cupronickel. Thermocouples and resistors whose resistance is stable across changes in temperature contain alloy constantin, which consists of 55% copper and 45% nickel. Mono metal is a nickel-copper alloy containing a minimum of 63% nickel. History. Chinese history. Cupronickel alloys were known as white copper to the Chinese since about the 3rd century BCE. Some weapons made during the Warring States period were made with C-uni alloys. The theory of Chinese origins of Bactrian cupronickel was suggested in 1868 by Flight, who found that the coins considered the oldest cupronickel coins yet discovered were of a very similar alloy to Chinese pactong. The author scholar Ho Wei precisely described the process of making cupronickel in about 1095 CE. The pactong alloy was described as being made by adding small pills of naturally occurring Yunnan ore to a bath of molten copper. When a crust of slag formed, saltpeter was added, the alloy was stirred and the ingot was immediately cast. Zinc is mentioned as an ingredient, but there are no details about when it was added. The ore used is noted as solely available from Yunnan. According to the story, San Maochun were at Tanyang during a famine year when many people died, so taking certain chemicals, Ying projected them onto silver, turning it into gold, and he also transmuted iron into silver, thus enabling the lives of many to be saved thereafter. All those who prepared chemical powders by heating and transmuting copper by projection called the methods Tanyang techniques. The late Ming and Qing literature have very little information about pactong. However, it is first mentioned specifically by name in the Thenkung Kai Wu of circa 1637, when Lu Kanxia Wo Chin is mixed and combined with Qithung, one gets yellow bronze. When Faishang and other arsenic substances are heated with it, one gets white bronze, or white copper, Paithong. When aluminita and other chemicals are mixed together, one gets Qingthung, green bronze. Kohung stated in 300 CE, the Tanyang copper was created by throwing a mercuric elixir into Tanyang copper and heated gold will be formed. Quote, however, the Pha Fusu and the Shennaiqing describing a statue in the western provinces as being of silver, tin, lead and Tanyang copper, which looked like gold and could be forged for plating and inlaying vessels and swords. Joseph Needham et al. Argue that cupronickel was at least known as a unique alloy by the Chinese during the reign of Luin in 120 BCE in Yunnan. Moreover, the Yunnanese state of Tian was founded in 334 BCE as a colony of the Chu. Most likely, modern Paktong was unknown to Chinese of the day, but the naturally occurring Yunnan or cupronickel alloy was likely a valuable internal trade commodity. Greco-Bactrian coinage in 1868. W. Flight discovered a Greco-Bactrian coin comprising 20% nickel that dated from 180 to 170 BCE with the bust of Euthydemus II on the obverse. Coins of a similar alloy with busts of his younger brothers, Pantaleon and Agathocles, were minted around 170 BCE. The composition of the coins was later verified using the traditional wet method and X-ray fluorescence spectrometry. Cunningham in 1873 proposed the Bactrian nickel theory, which suggested that the coins must have been the result of overland trade from China through India to Greece. Cunningham's theory was supported by scholars such as W. W. Tarn, Sir John Marshall and J. Newton Friend, but was criticized by E. R. Kalian S. Van R. Kamin. In 1973, Cheng and Schwitter in the New Analyses suggested that the Bactrian alloys were closely similar to the Chinese Paktong, and of 9 known Asian nickel deposits, only those in China could provide the identical chemical compositions. Kamin criticized Cheng and Schwitter's paper, arguing that the decline of cupronickel currency should not have coincided with the opening of the Silk Road. If the Bactrian nickel theory were true, according to Kamin, the Silk Road would have increased the supply of cupronickel. However, the end of Greco-Bactrian cupronickel currency could be attributed to other factors such as the end of the House of Euthydemus. European history. The alloy seems to have been rediscovered by the West during alchemy experiments. Notably, Andreas Libavius, in his Alchemia of 1597, mentions a surface whitened copper AS album by Mercury a silver, but in De Natura Metallorum in Singularum Part 1, published in 1599. The same term was applied to tin from the East Indies and given the Spanish name, tintanoso. Richard Watson of Cambridge appears to be the first to discover that cupronickel was an alloy of 3 metals. In attempting to rediscover the secret of white copper, Watson critiqued Jean-Baptiste Duhalde's History of China as confusing the term Paktong. He noted the Chinese of his day did not form it as an alloy but rather smelt it readily available unprocessed ore. Appeared from a vast series of experiments made at Peking that it occurred naturally as an ore mined at the region. The most extraordinary copper is Petonga white copper. It is white when dug out of the mine and even more white within than without. It appears by a vast number of experiments made at Peking that its color is owing to no mixture. On the contrary, all mixtures diminish its beauty, for, when it is rightly managed, it looks exactly like silver, and were there not a necessity of mixing a little to tenaga such metal to soften it, it would be so much more the extraordinary, as this sort of copper is found nowhere but in China, and that only in the province of Yunnan. Notwithstanding what is here said of the color of the copper being owing to no mixture, it is certain the Chinese white copper as brought to us is a mixed metal, so that the ore from which it was extracted must consist of various metallic substances, and from such ore that the natural orichalcum, if it ever existed, was made. During the peak European importation of Chinese white copper from 1750 to 1800, increased attention was made to its discovering its constituents. Peat and Cookson found that the darkest proved to contain 7.7% nickel, and the light is said to be indistinguishable from silver with a characteristic bell-like resonance when struck and considerable resistance to corrosion. 11.1%. Another trial by Andrew Fife estimated the nickel content at 31.6%. Guesswork ended when James Dinwiddie of the Macartney Embassy brought back in 1793, at considerable personal risk, some of the ore from which Pactong was made. Cupronickel became widely understood, as published by E. Thomason in 1823, in a submission, later rejected for not being new knowledge, to the Royal Society of Arts. Efforts in Europe to exactly duplicate the Chinese Pactong failed due to a general lack of requisite complex cobalt-nickel-arsenic naturally occurring ore. However, the Schneeberg district of Germany, where the famous Blaue Farben worker made cobalt blue and other pigments, solely held the requisite complex cobalt-nickel-arsenic ores in Europe. At the same time, the Prussian Vereinsjahr die Rang des Gewerbefleißes offered a prize for the mastery of the process. Unsurprisingly, Dr. E. A. Geithner and J. R. von Gersdorff of Schneeberg won the prize and launched their German silver brand under the trade names Argentin and Neusilber. In 1829, Percival Norton Johnston persuaded Dry Geithner to establish a foundry in Bow Common behind Regent's Park Canal in London, and obtained ingots of nickel-silver with the composition 18% Ni, 55% Cu and 27% zinc. Between 1829 and 1833, Percival Norton Johnson was the first person to refine cupronickel on the British Isles. He became a wealthy man, producing in excess of 16.5 tons per year. The alloy was mainly made into cutlery by the Birmingham firm William Hutton and sold under the trade name Argentine. Johnson's most serious competitors, Charles Arscon and Brock Evans, under the brilliant chemist Dry U. Benson, devised greatly improved methods of cobalt and nickel suspension and marketed their own brand of nickel-silver, called British Plate. By the 1920s, a 70-30 copper-nickel grade was developed for naval condensers. Soon afterwards, a 2% manganese and 2% iron alloy, now known as alloy C71640, was introduced for a UK power station which needed better erosion resistance because the levels of entrained sand in the seawater. A 90-10 alloy first became available in the 1950s, initially for seawater piping, and is now the more widely used alloy.